Let's talk about a tricky question. Where does your right to privacy stop, and where does police power begin? We're going to dive into a landmark Canadian court case that involves a plane ticket, a suspicious suitcase, and, yeah, a very good dog.
All right, so our story kicks off with a man named Mandeep Singh Chehil. Back in November of 2005, he took a flight, and the details of that trip seemed pretty normal on the surface, but to law enforcement, they added up to something else.
So here's what the police are looking at on the passenger list. A one-way ticket, paid for with cash. He bought it at the very last minute. He's traveling by himself on a red-eye flight, and he's only got one bag. Now, to you or me, that could be anything, right? A last-minute business trip, a family emergency. But to a trained police officer, did this look like a pattern? Was this enough to justify a search?
Well, based on that specific cluster of information, the RCMP in Halifax decided to bring in a specialist to check things out. And that specialist was a drug-sniffing dog named Boris. Get this, as the bags come off the plane, the officers line up Mr. Chehil's suitcase along with 9 others. Boris walks down the line, sniffs each one, and when he gets to Mr. Chehil's bag, he sits down. That's his signal. He's detected the scent of drugs. Based on that alert, Mr. Chehil was arrested, and when they opened his bag, they found 3 kilograms of cocaine.
But this is where the real fight begins. At the trial, the judge actually threw out the evidence. He said the police didn't have enough reason to use the dog in the first place. But then the Court of Appeal looked at it and said, nope, the search was totally legal. So now you've got a huge disagreement, and the case gets kicked all the way up to the Supreme Court of Canada to make the final call.
So the whole thing really boiled down to one massive question for the Supreme Court. What is the exact legal standard the police need before they can use a sniffer dog? And the answer comes down to the difference between 2 really important legal ideas, possibility and probability.
Think of it like 2 different levels of proof. To actually arrest someone, the police need probable grounds. That's the high bar. It means the crime is probable. But for something less intrusive, like having a dog sniff a bag in an airport, they only need reasonable suspicion. That's a lower standard, and it's based on just the possibility of a crime.
So the court explained that reasonable suspicion is this sort of middle ground. It's got to be more than just a gut feeling or a hunch, but it doesn't have to be the rock-solid certainty you need to make an arrest. All the police need are objective, real facts that point to the possibility that something illegal is going on.
Okay, but here's the million-dollar question, right? How can you build reasonable suspicion from a bunch of actions that, on their own, are totally, completely innocent?
I mean, let's look at the facts here. First off, paying with cash. So what? Lots of people prefer using cash. It means nothing by itself.
And traveling alone? Millions of people do that every single day, for business, for school, to visit family. It's perfectly normal. And buying a ticket at the last minute? That could easily be for some urgent, totally legitimate reason. So if every single piece is innocent, how can they possibly add up to something suspicious?
Well, this is where the Supreme Court used this brilliant analogy to explain its logic. Think about it. A single star in the sky is just a dot of light. But when you see a group of them together in a specific arrangement, you don't just see dots anymore. You see a pattern, a constellation, like the Big Dipper. The court said police work is just like that. It's not about looking at the individual stars. It's about seeing the whole pattern they create. So that powerful idea led the court to establish a formal rule. Police must look at the totality of the circumstances. They can't just pick one detail and ignore the rest. They have to look at the whole picture and, using their training and experience, decide if that constellation of facts points to a reasonable possibility of a crime. And this is key. They don't have to rule out every single innocent explanation to have that suspicion.
So, after all this legal back and forth, what was the final decision? And what does this ruling really mean for that balance between our privacy and our collective security?
In the end, the Supreme Court sided with the police. They said that, yes, when you look at that combination of factors, the cash, the one-way ticket, the last-minute booking, all of it, when you view it all together, it was enough to create that reasonable suspicion. And because of that, using Boris the sniffer dog was perfectly constitutional.
This case basically gives us the clear roadmap for how this works. You start with that constellation of seemingly innocent facts. Together, they create step 2, reasonable suspicion. That suspicion is what allows the police to conduct a dog sniff. And then, if the dog gives a positive alert, that suspicion gets elevated to the next level,
reasonable and probable grounds, and that's what gives the police the green light to make an arrest. You see how each step builds on the last one?
At the end of the day, the big takeaway here is all about balance. This ruling gives police an important tool to investigate crime for sure, but it also reinforces that our privacy is protected from random searches. The police can't just act on a hunch. Their suspicion has to be tied to a specific, objective set of facts. It's a fine line, but the court decided this was the necessary safeguard.
So, the Chehil case drew a pretty clear legal line in the sand. It shows how our own individual innocent actions can, when seen together, form a pattern that justifies an investigation. But it leaves all of us with a much bigger question to think about. In a world where data and patterns are absolutely everywhere, how do we make sure that line between security and privacy is always drawn in the right place?